Welcome everyone to another week of the webinars, number 18, Creating and Monitoring Functional Landscapes. So funded by the Australian Government Future Drought Fund, and the money funnels to us and the projects with the TasFarm Innovation Hub. Yeah, we've got lots of practice over in Victoria on drought in southwest Victoria and northeast Victoria. Um, Sorry about that. I still have my radio on the background. Boy. Um, even though it didn't play out as a classic El Nino, it still has produced some devastation around the country. So we're going to be doing more work on just how do we capture that and into a coherent argument. So just acknowledgement of country. I'm in the Gunai Kurnai country. Are the traditional owners in which I'm presenting from. There's some on the farm here on Wattle Park. There's some beautiful examples of scar trees and just sort of like you can really see where people lived and would have had you know lots of bounty. So before the lakes got opened at Lakes Entrance, it was all fresh water. So it just would have been full of birds and wildlife and freshwater fish and also acknowledging where some of the people are. I need one for New South Wales as well. So I don't think I finished that then. Anyway, still going well on this. It still keeps getting kicked up and saying it's a little bit too outcome driven and not enough about the practices, which I think is really interesting. But a friend of mine, a woman that I work with, Michelle, she said the other day, people like the theatre of the regenerative agriculture. So, the cover cropping and the machinery and all that sort of bit, not really the hard grind of actually doing it. So I'll come back to that a bit later. And I'm going to talk about sort of regenerative vegetable production and give you some homework as well, sort of to come up with regenerative chickens and regenerative pigs so that you can start to see that. So trying to be oblique so that we can come back to the grazing and the cropping and stuff. So try and talk about other things to help sort of bed that in. It's pretty clear that agriculture needs to be low cost, risk, resilient, and increasing biodiversity. There is no other way. When I worked for the DPI in Victoria, not called that anymore, um, DETJA or some other thing but yeah, when I worked for them, they just were suggesting, that we do what we currently do harder. I really like this level of, do nothing, do same thing harder, do something different. It's quite obvious we need to do something different. Um, they had the whole country hour was talking about the drought in southwest Victoria and the damage to the land, to the animals and the people, and the bank balances in southwest Victoria. Because it's so intensive, the risk is incredibly high, and the damage done by short periods of no rainfall, excuse me, is really crazy. And all the consultants around where I used to live near Hamilton really said you should always ignore the Bureau of Meteorology advice. This is what they were saying in November, December last year. And I go, no one's gone back and asked them. They wanted the Bureau of Meteorology to be disbanded, a bit like the ABC types behaviour. But no one's going back to ask them. So I've been um, stalking the country hour in Victoria, trying to get them to go back and ask those consultants, you know, what are you thinking now? Because they still haven't had an autumn break, and they're fully feeding massive numbers of animals, and they're lambing, and it is just a disaster. It's already too cold for significant growth until August, September. With those drought years, because the soil's so dry, usually if you get rain a bit later, the growth will start earlier in August, but otherwise they're going to be waiting for September. And the key month in southwest Victoria is October. From the last week of September to the first week of November, we used to grow 60 to 70% of our total year's output in that 6 weeks. So a bit like northwest dairy areas and stuff like that. Just, and everyone stresses about keeping on top of the growth. I think they'll have it covered this year. Try not to spiral down. So sorry, I felt like I was just annoys me because I've been working there for so long and it's back to desert again. So I had people from Ben Warden, there was a family here, and they rang me as they were driving through one year and laughing over the phone that they could see because it was one of my lines, we can see no evidence that you've had any impact here, Graham, which is what I say to people when that man asked me in New Zealand, what I was there for. And I said, I'm here to talk about grazing. And he said, New Zealanders are the best grazers in the world, was what his comment was. And I said, I see no evidence of that. And he was like one of those, and I didn't know, but he used to be like ex-SAS. He was one of those giants of men, made about two of me. He could have gone boom, 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 and driven me down through the soil. So, but yeah, this is really important stuff. You need the ground covered. I don't know if anyone that well, people do argue. They pretend they don't know, but this is so logical, so doing it. And I'll come to some questions later. If you want to start reducing inputs, what do you have to do? So that came up as a question. And these recovery, I don't know, anyone got a better word than modulators? I don't want levers. It's too mechanical. It's a bit more of a like it's like a magnetic modulating the behavior of
Is
the
it
grazing.
no, now I've forgotten it.
Oh, sorry.
Agents or agency, because you talk about having agency to change
Yeah,
things. So there might be something along the lines of agents or such.
yeah. It's a word we use a lot with Dave Snowden, Kirsten. So he talks about actors and agency and all that sort of stuff. So I'll see if I can find one. But I probably need to just well, I was doing something the other day, and the stock density does increase the little litter cover. It's pretty clear that it promotes ground cover and makes things germinate. Stock density, it increases perennial grass germination, and then the recovery increases the basal area. It pushes the litter onto the soil as litter cover. It promotes the decomposition, and stock density also tends to favour that surface roughness. So I just need to go through again and make sure I've got it sorted in my head, because people are starting to use it more and they don't realise that I was still dripping wet from the shower when I did this, um, in the caravan at Marimbula Beach. So, and being the type of person I am, I never go back. So I've never gone back to sort of think if I got it right the first time. 5 steps, and haven't changed that order either. This is a big issue. This sort of how, if you're not going to use rumen supplements to promote rumen stability, you've got to work 7 days a week. And it's a really big issue. It's sort of starting to wear me down at the moment. I see myself as pretty resilient, but I notice of late I'm getting a bit, just 7 days a week, 7 days a week. And then sort of a week, a month or something, I either go working or have a break. But it's not a weekend off, So the routine of it can be quite numbing. Rob's not here, but I was thinking a bit like a dairy farmer, like it just starts to wear you out. You're on the edge of exhaustion. You've got to drag yourself out of bed and stuff. Um, safe to fail trials still going really well on that, and I've been stirring up people on in Spain and France and stuff on safe to fail trials and telling them they can either find out how their land reacts in 2 to 3 years, or they can spend the next 10 to 15 working it out. Your choice. So, I'm starting to get very clear about what we need to do. Simple breeding, all those sort of things, and then breed cattle that fit. Like bumper bowling, you don't want to end up in the gutters, the safe to fail trials. This is from Dave Snowden. It's about the brain and how we need to go back to apprenticeships is really what he's saying here. That our brain's lazy, so to learn a new thing, it takes a new thing like driving a car can take 2 to 3 years. He often talks about the London taxi drivers, and they've got to train and get the knowledge so that they can recite all the paths and routes and best ways and stuff, and it actually changes the frontal cortex. They drive around with a map on a moped or a small motorbike and learn all the routes, and it actually changes their brains over that 2 to 3 years of getting the knowledge. So, and I think that this sort of grazing and management that we're talking about, I think it's bigger than learning to drive and computer coding. So I think it might be 2 to 3 years minimum if you do safe to fail trials. Because the trouble is, if you don't do the safe to fail trials, you don't get clear feedback. You don't know whether it was because of the season, because of the density. There's too many things that you don't know. So if you don't get clear feedback, it's very, very hard to see the patterns. So just that sort of idea, I think we, need to use it sort of. And I don't think most people like to think very much because it does take a lot of energy. So, it's really interesting. I sort of arguing with people. They're very, very high literates, the people I'm arguing with. They sound like they're experts in the world, but they really don't know anything practical. But it's quite interesting. They're still training people. So,
Graham, can I ask a question on the safe to fail trials?
Sure.
So are you essentially like you've got different exclosures in the paddock?
Yeah.
And are you basically comparing the different recovery times, or are you doing a combination of recovery times and different stocking rates and different utilization, or like are you just focusing on generally on the recovery time in those trials?
In our high
Or all
rainfall
three of
area,
the modulators?
yeah, in our high rainfall, you can get away with these, not fiddling too much with these, but there is a threshold for stock density, and it's very high. It's like 1,000 cows a hectare, um, above which you'll germinate perennial grasses, below which you'll germinate perennial grasses, but also thistles and broadleafs and forbs and stuff like that. So you can germinate a lot of weeds at low stock density. So and the same with recovery. Usually, if people have got a lot of those plants, their recovery's wrong. But over a certain stock density, you tend to germinate predominantly perennial grass. So that's why I sort of try and lock that one down a bit. And then to keep the carbon nitrogen ratio functioning so that you don't lock it up with too much carbon and biomass, I try and push people for utilization. So I'm actually constraining the safe to fail trials for people because they won't do enough. I'm constraining them so that they get an answer. So my throwaway line is to say, if you do 12 months recovery, 1,000 to 3,000 cows a hectare, or the sheep per square meter at 80% plant utilization, I can help you from there because I've done that one a lot. I've got a big database in my head for that one. And if it doesn't appear to be correct, we'll be able to see it from there. Do you know, like it's one of those ones that it'll be in the band that, you know, or maybe you have to go like out at Cobar. You know, we did one at 12 months and it wasn't long enough. Do you know, so we then went out to 2 years, and that was about right for them because people want to fit to a pattern that's something that they can sort of, you know, close enough that they can fiddle around with, a bit like the bumper bowling without falling out. But you need to get a few of these sort of marks for your environment. So if it was a wet year out at Cobar, then, you know, it might be 12 months, but otherwise it just didn't produce enough growth and litter. If it was a dry year, it's like the work Celia did at Oakhampton and stuff. The 3 months didn't increase litter. It actually lost litter between the 3 months grazing events, and that was in the La Nina. Do you know? So now that it's gone back to a more typical pattern, the 3 months, the 6 months, they all start to fall out. So you want enough stability so that you can keep the money in the business. So it's that sort of, you need to be inefficient. You're not trying to sit on the edge of things. So inefficient for most people, but efficient in terms of stability, water infiltration, and nutrient cycling. So you're not trying to eat plants at the optimum leaf emergence. You want to be past that so that you've got some slack in the system. So, yeah. So
with the stock density, you're looking at minimum of 1 cow per 10 square meters, but preferably more like 1 per 3.
it really needs, it really needs to be the 1 to 3. So
yeah,
you want to make sure that you've hit past it. Do you know that you want to know that you're well and truly over the threshold. And I find I was going to say for the Y chromosome carriers amongst us, we want an answer in 12 months. If you do 3,000 cows a hectare or a cow per 3 square meters, then you will get an answer in 12 months. Most people don't like the 5 years or 10 years stuff. So I'm trying to give people a quick answer that then they can work out how to manage the rest of the property in that direction. So not towards a goal, that's like anti-complexity. You know, goals and visions and missions and purpose, they're all anti-complexity. They belong in the complicated world where it's more constrained. In the complex world, we want to know the direction of travel. We need like a vector-based goal, but I won't go on about that. But, you know, a lot of that stuff about purpose and vision and missions and all that sort of stuff, you know, came out of California in the 70s or thereabouts. You know, it's got to be suspect at all times, doesn't it? So, and people pay the people that make a career out of those sort of things are the ones that know how to game the language. And gaming the language has never been a great skill. Seem to be a bit too brutal or something. Yeah, so just that regenerating, we need to be building soil, building biodiversity, always having 100% ground cover. I think we can do this everywhere, and this is what I've been discussing on some of the forums, is that you can do this everywhere, but people put another overlay over it. So you can regenerate anything, anywhere, you know, from Somaliland, like Benjamin, to the middle of Australia. You can do it anywhere. But the questions they want, and this is what they're not actually making explicit, I want to regenerate, but at my current stocking rate, and usually my current recoveries, they want you to tell, how do I make that regenerate, rather than the idea that keep searching until you find something that works in your environment. People are putting other overlays, I don't know a better word, but they're sort of Does that make sense? Do people get it that they don't want to change their stocking rate or their cattle or or their sheep? I've got the best sheep, I've got the best cattle, I've got everything. I don't want to change my sowing machine. Their seed drill. They actually want they want to do it with what they're doing currently, and they want some sort of magic thing for me to provide them with. This hasn't changed any, so I'll keep going. I watched the megafauna thing last night, and I kept coming back to that. We know that the diprotodons were running around here for 2 million years. The ice ages, the current ice ages, started about 2.4 million years, and they believe there's probably been 20 to 40 ice ages like the one that wiped them out 45,000 years ago or whatever it was. So 40 of those, and none of them wiped out all the short-faced kangaroos and the diprotodons and the Thylacoleo carnifex. But all of a sudden, 45,000 years ago, boom, and they're gone. And I go, well, everywhere we went, we wiped out the megafauna. You don't need to go far. We wiped them out in New Zealand, we wiped them out on mainland America. It's just ridiculous. But everyone, it's a bit brutal for people to think that we probably wiped out all the other humans as well, or humanoids, or whatever they call them. I'm trying to remember the ones in Asia. I can't get them. But yeah, that sort of stuff. So yeah, it just made me think of this. So the grasses were here, and they kept saying how most of these animals ate bushes and stuff like that, which just about makes me pop a hose. So a 2-ton marsupial eating a few leaves and bushes and stuff. Yeah, it's just ridiculous. Sorry, Kirsten.
No, that's okay. Can you, you've got that statement, perennial grass can't drop its leaves. Can you explain why you put that up there, or what it was an argument for or against, or sorry, give it context again?
Yeah, so why I put it up here is I make these statements when I'm talking, because as everyone knows, perennial grasses can't drop their leaves. Yeah, I'll say something like that. And then I find out sort of later that drip feeds in, we didn't know, Graham, that perennial grasses can't drop their leaves. And it's not even that people didn't know it beforehand, is that I don't close the loop on why that's important. So that explains why we had this co-evolution of grazing and grasses together. They actually evolved together. And when you take out the diprotodons and the grazing animals and all the different varieties of kangaroos, you then have to start burning to clear the growth points for the grasses to keep them healthy, because they can't drop their leaves. So burning
if they
is
can't,
a consequence.
sorry, if they can't drop their leaves, what's the penalty for if you do nothing and something can never drop its leaves? What's the penalty?
So it fills up. The growth points are at the ground level, so that when they're grazed, they don't eat the growth points and they can regrow the grasses. So, but what happens is you keep getting that leaf emergence, 1, 2, 3, 4, one dead, all that sort of stuff. So I've forgotten, ryegrass has 3 actively growing leaves. I think Phalaris 4, Cocksfoot 5. But that doesn't matter. They fill themselves up with litter, and they choke the growth points of the grass. It then dies in the ground. And then once it's choked themselves out, that's when you get your grassland to woody shift. If it's a high landscape function grassland, it'll go to trees. If it's a low landscape function grassland, it'll go to some of the woody weeds, the briar rose, what's your yellow one? God, I can't get it.
Gorse.
Gorse, that's the one. That was the winning line when I first came down to Tasmania. Was that Ice came out and said, before I'd come to Tasmania, I thought Ballarat was the gauze capital of the world. And that went well. People thought I was very charming.
Gorse and blackberries, Graham.
Yeah, exactly. Blackberries. Thanks, Luke. So that's that shift. If you're getting a grass, so that's from grasses choking themselves out.
Yeah, that's the step I was missing. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're getting a shift to forbs and thistles and capeweed and stuff, that's from having their root reserves weakened from too short of recoveries. So they're at different ends. So what's really good is that people that are set stocking, well, it's not really good, but I think of it as really good. They can do both in the same paddock. So they've got the animals sitting on an area grazing that, and that goes to capeweed, and they won't go here. Horse grazing's the classic, Kirsten, and they won't go here because they've dunged or it was up the back or it got a bit stale and they can't, their guts won't process it, and it'll be going woody in the same paddock. So it's overuse, but I've been trying to say its recovery is too short between grazing events. I used to say overuse and underuse, but it's actually recovery is too short, not clearing their growth points up the other end. So they're quite separate, and it's really so. What I've got here up the top, Kirsten, is what I was trying to say is I feel like I don't close the loop because I think of another idea and go on to that straight away, in case you hadn't picked up on that, sort of the attention span of an amoeba. So I go off and, I think it's something else. And I go, oh, Graham, close the loop, So that's what I keep banging on, trying to get that idea into me. I haven't updated that, so I won't do anything there. Most of the beef operations have been surviving on this green line, which is the rate of return on including capital appreciation of the land. This is this is the business return in yellow, which has been bumping around, as we know, zero. And if farmers start to keep too much money, then all the prices go up for inputs, and the money for the cattle goes down. So got to keep people bumping along the line just to keep them interested. But most of the farmers have been borrowing against this capital appreciation of the land, and it's going to come home to roost eventually. I thought it would be quicker, but it doesn't seem to be. It's like everyone, if it gets too tough, they back off, the banks and the input suppliers and everyone else. So I tried to be funny with this last night and it didn't work. I sort of get criticised for maybe not always practicing what I preach. I'm not mentioning any names, but some people give me a hard time. So I was saying this was a cattle move. It's actually out of an American film. And this was marketing for that film. So the cattle look well. I have no problem with that, but the land is an absolute disaster. There is no landscape function there. And I said it was a drone shot I'd taken on the weekend of our place here, but no one thought I was funny. So, but this is what you see all the time. This is recovery's too short. It's got forbs and things coming through. It's got bare ground. There's no litter. It's got lots of annuals. It's a disaster. And they're using that as a promotion. I took a clip out of the shorts for the film, the trailer for the film, and I just took a screenshot. And I go, if that's the level of understanding, we have got serious issues. So anyway, I won't go on about it. So this is what we're doing at the moment. I've had the cows for the meat business in a separate paddock, and I just shifted them into the night paddock, which allowed those ones to get in with everyone else. And it was like mayhem. Yeah, that they all had been together up until about 10 months ago, and they've been out and they were fighting one another. It was just, I was just yelling at them, be good, you kids, so. And it was quite weird because some of them would go up and rub heads in a very affectionate way, and then they'd have to fight, like. So they obviously miss one another, and I felt like they embarrassed themselves, and then they had to fight. So I thought there was lots of parallels with people. So I'm going, oh, I've settled that. Yeah. So that went on for quite a while. The area where they are at the moment, this is pretty heavy with rushes and Powatussig and stuff. It's starting to open up. It's very awkward and hard to regenerate some of these areas. I'm making them work pretty hard, but they're going all right. But yeah, you sort of, like it's ankle breaking sort of where this is. So during the La Nina, this was just flooded and wet, and now it's sort of like rushes and Powatussig. So yeah, not a lot of fun. So but yeah, it sort of works all right. And it's getting better. It is getting grass germinating in underneath. So this is the plan. Here's some here that you germinate the better grasses between that, which then allows you to come in harder the next time, which produces more so that you get that winding up. So you're not attacking the power and the rushes directly. You're trying to create the conditions that push them out. So it's a different way of thinking about the world. I won't do my Y chromosome or something, but yeah, people want to rush at it. But like, these are generally not big areas. They catch your eye, but they're generally not big areas. So just focus on shifting them over time. And I've done it successfully before, but it'll take 3 to 5 years probably to shift that away from where that is. And the purpose, whenever you've got these plants that they won't eat, is to focus on germinating and watching the recovery of the grasses that you do want, making sure they're recovered. And don't look at this. You almost have to go a bit zen on everything else. Just look at what's happening in here. I won't go into this, but it was just sort of starting to put the drought project together. And I love a mind map. I don't know why I stopped doing it. So I won't bore people with it, but sort of it just works for me because I can say water. What do I want to say? So, I want to talk about that we got the engineer to design it, that we put in 2-inch pipe, we used turf valves. We had to clean out all the tanks because they weren't clean enough to run through the diaphragm valves that I use, the Polymaster trough and the Hansen valves that I've got was supposed to send to. Was in one of Rob's questions. It's water's always the first corrective action. Because we run some pipe across the ground, we have issues with getting too hot and you've got to keep dumping the water. But it's only a small trough. It's only a 200-litre trough for that number of cows. So they learn to take it in turns, and because they're grazing, we don't typically get big mobs going and drinking. There's usually 1s and 2s going and drinking. So dumping it and making it cool again can really increase that. And then I was just doing the bulls, the cattle, how to train them to electric fences. Why is it drought resilient? Because it's in. Oh, excuse me. It's inefficient. Oh dear. Yeah, and about the trials and why and all that sort of stuff, and what we did with putting a grid over Google Earth for the fencing. So if you want to go through that, and if it comes out, I might send the PowerPoint as full slides so that you can see it. And if you scan it and go, oh, you haven't said anything about that I was just putting it in as a prompt.
What was the trials at 50 to 100 meters and numbers built from 50 to 100 meters on the fencing?
Yeah, when we started, we had 60 cows, and 50 meters was the right width for the strips, Luke. Once the numbers built to sort of like 120, 150, then 100 meters worked. So it was less width. But what I found I've done is some of the areas that we want to move quicker, like that area I just showed you, that would be better in a 50-meter wide strip, because you can sort of really bang it harder at the same stock density. I've got this really cognitive dissonance over, we sort of know the cows are more competitive in a long, narrow strip. It's like they can see the front fence and they think they're all going to, so they're much more competitive on their eating than in a square. But to regenerate the Poa-Tussock and the rushes and that, it seems to work better on a 50-meter. So I'm not sure what's going on there. I need to do some safe to fail trials, I think. So there's too many variables to work it out. Oh, excuse me. That was just a software that I was looking at with a mind map that links, and you can go into infinite detail and disappear. Caroline asked about the drought in southwest Victoria, and she was sort of saying that there's people that are feeding 2,000 cows in confinement over there, and everyone will be trying to lobby the government to start paying out for all their money they lost, so because they weren't managing. And Caroline is, so she's hardly fed at all. She's got animals in really good condition, but even she's thinking she might lock in a bit of hay in case she needs it, because it hasn't started raining yet. And then about the expenses, and we talked about this. I used to always do that line that don't change anything when you go home. Don't drop inputs. Don't do anything, because I'm not sure the farm knows you've been on a training course. So what we were talking about last night is, if you want to reduce your fertilizer, you've got to increase your landscape function first so that you get your nutrient cycling. So, you can't just go cold turkey on things when you've got no soil structure, no decomposing litter, no perennial grass basal area. So you've got to, while you're using the fertilizer, I'd focus on increasing the nutrient cycling and do that. That'd work really nicely to wean from one to the other. The same with weeds. If you can learn how to control them in a safe to fail trial and expand it and know that you've got it covered, then stop using your herbicide. The only ones that I see people drop early and get away with it are like fungicides and insecticides. When we control the animals and we control their dung scores, you can drop a lot of the vaccinations and drenching. But until you control the dung scores, you can't. So when we shifted farms, I put them out for 6 months on agistments that stopped. I drenched them, I vaccinated them, I did all that, because you couldn't control it. And then when you think that you're ready to sort of see whether you can drop some of these inputs, I always say take 5% or a percentage, a small percentage of the animals, that if they all died, you weren't upset, which is a bit brutal for people. I'm just trying to drive it home. It is an experiment all the time. You've got to do a trial on it, just see whether it's worked, whether something's changed. People run down the beliefs and the theatre of things. So this was a question from Rob. How are we going for time? Is shifting it 7 times at high density, and they're eating so much grass. And then that one day the cattle are given one big area. So a move a day is about the minimum I can make work and keep the cattle rumen stable. So anything more than that, I'm then having to wean them back on. to work hard when I come back. But once a day moves seems to be able to work okay, because you're moving them frequently enough to almost keep the rumen stable. You know, that's sort of like what you're trying to do all the time. So once a day, but let's say, you know, once a day or once every 3 days or something. Yeah, they're giving a big area, same amount of grass. Well, I've tried to say before, I have to give them an extra 30% if I set stock them for the day than if I shift them 7 times. So it's quite a big percentage. So what the cattle do, they go around and eat the green grass first. This green grass with high protein changes their rumens. It passes through the rumens in some amount of time. It usually goes pretty well for that first one. And then over the next day or two, that you'll start to see that their gut fills go down and their dung scores go up, which is what Rob's saying here. And then over time, you start to see the body condition score decrease. So a month of that or a fortnight of that, where they've got lower dung scores, lower gut fills, you start to get less fat on them. They lose weight, basically. So, and they're losing weight because they're not getting enough to eat, and they're losing weight because they've got diarrhea and scouring. So they can't keep nutrients in them. But and the only thing I'd add to this for Rob would be he said something about nutrients or something, might be on the next. Oh, unable to obtain the nutrients that they need. And the big ones are water, energy, and protein. You know, that's the big things that the cows need. So, and then it's all the micronutrients. But because they've got diarrhea, dairy cows most of the time, they worry about the micronutrients a lot in dairy because they can't keep micronutrients in them. So they've always got something going on in terms of micronutrients. So they're usually not getting enough to eat, scouring, too much milk producing, and not enough energy in them. So the only thing that keeps them alive generally is feeding them grain in the bale when they're on that really young grass. So
do you use any licks, Graham, on your
I have done, Luke. I've tried a lot of the protein licks. I've done the free choice minerals in a trolley. And I think there might be benefits. So I always struggled. The best thing about the mineral trolley was that it highlighted that I wasn't giving the paddocks enough recovery, but basically fixed the dung scores, and there's usually enough nutrients and stuff in the grass. So I'd be focusing on that because that's under your control rather than, they're usually quite expensive. When I was doing the free choice minerals, it was costing as much per cow or much per hectare as if I was fully fertilizing. So, and I didn't feel like I was getting the same, the same amount of impact that I would have if I was doing a full fertilizer program. So I felt that it wasn't as good a value as full fertilizer program. So I went back to just monitoring the dung scores, making sure they're keeping the nutrients in them, keeping the gut fills high, doing all that. So
what you were just saying, Graham, and Rob's observations there, that's exactly what I've seen here.
Yeah.
As far as that, mine have gone backwards because I've been moving them every 3 or 4 days because I've been away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they've really gone backwards.
Yeah. They fall apart pretty quick. So
yeah.
Graham, I was just going to say this thing about stability of the gut microbiome. This is really, all this that we've been going through really drives how much value's in that. I mean, you're talking about cattle, but it's exactly the same with horses, with a big fermenter. Yeah, and you're realizing that, well, 30%.
Yeah. They're giant put machines, those things.
Oh, so, God, yeah.
I think that you can really yeah, you can, if you can keep them stable and working, do you know, like they love old feed. Do you know,
Yeah, you don't have the
the hindgut fermenters always ran behind the ruminants. They always got the leftovers, sort of on the savannas and stuff. But some reason we've got this idea that they've got to have better feed than cows. They actually need worse feed than cows, and then all the vets say, "Oh, it depends how much work they're in Graham," and yeah, blah blah. And I go, "Yeah, but like then you're having to drench them, and like
it's more that if they're working really heavy, you can get away with, you're more likely to be able to get away with it. Not that it's that they
not a
need
great
better food.
result.
It's more that you can get away with it, sort of. Yeah.
Yeah, they were designed to run in big herds and eat rough tucker, but incredibly large volumes of rough tucker. So
Yeah.
um,
No, but just
yeah,
that whole stability of gut, like you're
yeah,
saying, it's a real thing. And because we talk about performance, growing food and stuff, growing muscle and stuff with the cattle,
yeah.
yeah, there's an actual measure of it. And I think that's been a real big learning from this for me. It's quite a significant learning that
Of course.
stability of gut microbiome provides a huge cost advantage to you.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, because you can get them to eat things that other people would just be going, "No, mine won't. My horse won't eat that." Do you know? Because the classic, "My sheep won't eat native grasses," they used to say when I was at Stiper around Wellington and things like that. And I'd always say, can you get them to eat grain? Yes. And I go, if you can wean them onto grain, you can wean them onto native grasses. That used to upset sort of a lot of those things. But yeah, just the whole idea that they're designed to eat grass. They're not designed to eat grain. So wean them onto it. And then Rob's asked us, how do you know when to go from 7 to 6? Well, you'd know because they were full, and you'd have bulging animals. They'd be putting on weight, so you could still stay at the 7 shifts. But if you weren't getting your utilization, you might cut back to 6 and slow them down to get your recovery. But only if you're getting that body condition score or milk, if it was Rob on his dairy. So it's about adjusting to, are you getting that outcome that you want? So, and if they're cows that you've like, I'm thinking, I'm sort of channeling Rob here on his dairy farm. Those cows aren't used to working hard. Do you know? So if you start making them work too hard and making them utilize too deeply, they won't perform and they won't milk. So he will really get a really good idea of whether he can drop shifts and things like that from the milk in the vat. So, but typically on a beef enterprise, I just do this thing. So you've actually got to do it and repeat it a few times. After the first 30 years, I've found that I can guess a bit more. But generally, when I'm training people, I say, "Oh, do you think you can go back to 6?" Yeah, they go, "I think I can." Okay, well, let's go back to 6 for 2 or 3 days and see what happens. Not one day, unless it's a disaster. But usually I think of it a bit more like sighting in a rifle. The first shot, there's lots of things changed. I don't know. Oh, the second shot's also over there. Yeah, the third shot confirms it. So you need to do things a few times just to make sure that you've confirmed it and that they're going. So the single biggest thing that I find to start the day is, did I give them enough overnight? And so, but because it's been so cold, I've been getting the fence lifter to do the first move at 7:30, so almost a little bit, and I go out at 9 when it's sort of warmed up a little bit. So again, after the first 30 years, I don't think that's pushing it too much. And then I'm making an assessment. Well, what do I have to do now? If they're all low in gut fills and yelling at me, I go, "Oh, geez, I'm going to have to work now to get them full again." So the portable trough, I'll put a photo in of it. And also, so I use a Polymaster 200 litre trough, but I changed the float valve to a diaphragm one, and I'll put that in the PowerPoint. I was already shifting. So this question from Rob, well, what made you decide to shift at high densities? I was already doing it before Johan's work. And I'd already started on the lanes idea because I couldn't see how you could do things. But Johan's work really just confirmed that, like, this is what he's doing. I really like his stock density, his utilization. But I think in a winter growing grasslands like most of us are, except maybe for the banks, you'd lose your perennials too quickly with recoveries that are too short. So there's a big difference between summer growing grasses, C4 grasses, and C3 grasses. So, yeah, so I'll come back to that. Just quickly, this was on the one of the groups I'm on, and this guy posted this. It was actually a video, but it was a few perennials, but most of this is all annual under here. And he's so everyone was saying how good it was, which is like a bit of a red rag to a bull for Mr. Landscape Function. So it looked okay if you looked across it. So I said, "Oh, Francisco, can you send me some photos looking down to it, and I'll do an estimated landscape function." So there, like there's some really, like, what do they call this, water phalaris or whatever? And, some really big perennials and things like that. But they're just so sparse. You can sort of see that this just hasn't had enough recovery. I was going to do it more of an exercise, but I've been talking too much. But that's how you create these conditions. So low density grazing with too short a recovery, and you end up with all annuals and a few perennials. In this environment, like, you should be able to grow full perennials. So so they're cutting it for hay. They talked about the yield, which is another one that sort of I have to breathe, just relax, Graham, breathe. Focusing on production is just a disaster. So this is a group all about regenerative agriculture. And there's just no perennial grass basal area in it. And this was the one I assessed and estimated the landscape function for. So I went through and I gave it a score for, how much perennial cover, how much perennial basal cover, how much litter, and with slight decomposition. I estimated, what did I do? I said that it's probably slight decomposition. So these were really high scores above what I thought it really was. But I didn't want to get into an argument about assessing a photo and being too tough. So I did that. I've got these scores which are in the LFA. I said it had no cryptogams, which is the moss and lichen layer, because it looks pretty well covered. No crust brokenness. So again, because it's covered. No negligible or not applicable or small amount, no evidence of erosion, no evidence of deposited material that's washed in, because when you've got that sort of density, you don't get that. Whereas out in those aridy areas, they're getting a lot of leaf litter and perennial grass litter or annual litter moving. But like any, so you get litter banks everywhere, and that's what that deposited materials. If you got deposited materials coming in, that's bad because it's eroding from somewhere. I was saying it had small amount of surface roughness, which holds up the water and slows it down, allows it to infiltrate. It creates pools for the nutrients to cycle in, and tiny little dams everywhere and stuff. Sort of, this is surface resistance to disturbance is a springiness, moderately hard, which would be what it was. And then I just guessed at what the soil type was. So I didn't get that quite right. It's a bit sandier than what my best guess of what it would be. But So, you know, so after the first couple of times you do landscape function, this all means something to you. So I know that Celia's done enough because she was doing 5 or 6 LFAs every 3 months. You know, that's enough. You start to be able to see, and you can almost look at this and go, oh yeah, because what David Tonglow would be saying was these perennials that you can see aren't the 2 centimeters by 2 centimeter bases. So they could be gone next season, and all the annuals could be gone next season. So it's not that stable and ongoing. Do you know? So I've really given it a good go because it was nearly ground covered. This is the green ones, what I'm saying, the minimum to call yourself regenerative, which is slightly higher numbers than this. And I said that Francisco's with a kind evaluation was just below that. So when I went back and presented this and said that it was pretty close, you know, I felt like I was a bit like Pinocchio. I was making it up, but you know, it's nearly close enough to be verified as regenerative under the standard we have developed. And I have assumed that a slight decomposition of the litter, so I couldn't see that. Yeah, and then I gave him advice on how to fix it. So some of that unasked for advice, which goes really well with men, I found. But I am not keeping my powder dry for next year or something. There mightn't be a next year. So you're getting the advice whether you want it or no. Not let me know if not clear. He came back and then said, maybe, you know, do you consider soil type? It's very sandy. Is the minimum to be verified the same metric? So, you know, if it's sandy, and I said yes, and and I said the questions were great. The answer is not in the LFA manual. But then I got stuck on this idea. I really hate reference areas. So everyone this is ecologist thinking. I'll look for the best example of that grassland. Let's stick to grassland or bush or whatever. And then I'll see how far this damaged area is from that. And then we'll try and drive it to it. But the only trouble is those reference areas are not sustainable. They're falling apart. So it cannot be a reference area. So I said that it's faulty logic. We know from Benjamin's trial that with 12 months it would have turned out like that. But if you'd asked, I wanted to say there's too many ecologists on it, but if you'd asked, you would have got a slightly better settled on a slightly better area of desert. It still would have been desert, not a grassland. So, and then I went on to say about all that sort of other stuff that I've already talked to you about. Things, and just that he needs to do the safe to fail trials because low quality feedback is as a result of not enough constraint. So if you don't know what you actually did in the area and you can say clearly that it was because I did this that it created this movement, once you know that movement, then you can do more of it and amplify it rather than dampening it. So how was that? Was that too much, too quick? Just quickly to finish. Oh, I might have to finish. I wanted everyone to do some homework. I came up with this idea of, I wrote a Stiper newsletter article on regenerative vegetable production. And I scaled it from the worst being number 1 to the 5 being number 2. This was with Colin Size. And so conventional vegetable production is a terrible soil killing disaster of a thing. If we all went to eating conventional vegetable production, if we all went vegetarian and vegan, we'd destroy the planet. So, and it's really clear to me that you can't have regenerative vegetable production without grazing. So I'll leave you to read this. I'm not a fan of compost in broad scale. It works well in where it's turned by hand labor and things like that. Once you start turning it using lots of fossil fuel and transport, it just loses me. It's got too much in embodied CO2 in it. So this is Gabe Brown at number 4, and this is what Colin can do at number 5. This is Gabe Brown doing spuds into compost and then putting old hay over them with visible fungal attack to grow his spuds. And they also do this real mixture of vegetables and hand harvest, all this, and his wife works very hard. But I'll leave you to have a look at this, but they make a lot of money out of it as well. So that was out of a presentation by Paul Brown. Yeah, and this is Colin with his species. So your homework, should you choose to accept it, is to develop a similar list of regen for chickens and pigs, because we really need to start understanding that we need grazing animals to grow vegetables, and we've got to get off eating that much chicken and pig. So, and I keep saying no one's saying this for people, but we all need to know, oh, okay, if I do that, if we grow more chickens, we're just going to get more disaster. I keep asking the Country Hour and anyone that's talking about the bird flu in Victoria, has there been any of the free range, the pasture raised, which have got more exposure to wild birds? Have any of them caught the flu yet? And they might, but at the moment they haven't. It's always the 500,000 chicken places that are killing the chickens. Very good. How was that? A little bit too much. Sorry, Kirsten.
I was just wondering, because whether or not, when you've got some new material like this in a new area, because we spend a fair bit of time going over the first steps, we repeat them each time, whether or not we can now sort of like trim some of that occasionally. And so we've got a bit more time to look at some of these new things.
I'll reflect on that, Kirsten. And
I mean, each time I pick up something new, but understanding what we can do here, this could be...
Well, we might do this again next week on the regen veggies, because I think it helps. I was trying to present something that's a little bit oblique, but and not necessarily what we think of in terms of landscape function, so that you can think back to how, oh, okay, this fits with this and stuff. I think people see the links better. Yeah, so I will spend more time on it. I agree.
Can you send the Stiper article or link to that if you have you still got it, or is this the guts of it in this slide that you've given here?
It's pretty well the guts of it. I'll send the rest of it though, Luke. It's got more words in it. What happened was we were putting it into Publisher and I lost all the Publisher ones, but I might be able to find the newsletter for it. So, and I'll send you the link. They should be somewhere, the newsletter articles. But I wrote 2 a year, but it took sort of like 2 weeks minimum to write a newsletter article, because I asked, there was a woman doing her Masters of Ag with me, and I said, what do you want me to write on? And I gave her a list of topics and she picked regenerative vegetables, and I go, oh God, I don't know anything about vegetables. I didn't want to do it. You don't ask. I should have said. Okay. I hope that was all right. And I hear what you're saying, Kirsten. I'll work out how to skip some of those things, but I think there's sort of the bedrock of regenerative agriculture. So I try and embellish them every week a little.
A bit like when we had the guest speaker come in, we sort of like, it's a special focus for one evening or something like that.
Oh, right. Can I dress up as well?
Oh, shit, yeah, you can. Yeah. If you really want to. But, it's like tonight we're just going to look at this, because I think the more angles we look at the whole regenerative agriculture, each time it sort of enriches your understanding. And it also means if people start having a go at you, you've got a broader base of understanding to try and help bring them along.
Yeah. And I think that was what I was trying to do with that homework idea. So as well, if you have to start thinking of a list, or how would you run chickens and how would you run pigs? Because I don't see regen pigs. So the only people that I've ever seen that you could say were regen were the Johnsons, Sam and Claire, near Young. It's not called Young, but I can't remember the name of the town. Between Young and Barua, somewhere there.
There's
Very
a guy
good.
in the US whose name I forget, but I'll dig up the video, who's got lots of tree rows and alley cropping, and he's doing pigs on kind of fallen apples and nuts and those sort of things.
Yeah, there's a lot doing that.
Shepherd.
Yeah, that's him.
Yeah. Not regenerative. So like you can just.
We know you don't like trees, Graham.
No. The pigs, I'm saying.
The pigs, yeah.
Yeah, the Johnsons come close because they were moving them when I was there a couple of times a day. They had everything set up so they could move them through the grasslands and kept it as a grassland. But most people don't. They set the pigs up that they're in the same spot for months or a month or something, and then they destroy the soil. It's like repeated ploughing for a month.
Yeah. So do we need to look at the ecology where the pigs evolved a bit, like, how you talk about?
Or you could just design something that increases landscape function. That's really what I'm after. So very good. Hope that was okay, everyone.
Thanks.
See you all.
Thanks,
See
Dave.
you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.